So this is my first module. The first module is about refreshing back concept on biodiversity, which is quite important because we are studying invertebrate that come from many different phylum and many different groups. So just to remind back some of it, especially on the classification that you already learned in the past subject on ecology, but it's just a refreshing lectures. So bear with me. It's good to recap back what you have learned as is the concept of biodiversity and on the binomial nomenclature. They are very important in biology. I always try to insist that because we still meet with students in the final year that are a bit not aware of the requirement of the biological nomenclature or the binomial system that we use, scientific name, how should we write everything correctly. And when asked in the seminars, they said they forgot. So this is something that cannot be forgotten easily. It has to be embedded in your mind, and it has to be a practice where you are a biologist, although you are aquaculture program, but this has to be taken seriously and always remember and don't forget it anytime when you are still a student and even when you go out and work in got your own career later. Right, I just want to review on systematic and taxonomy again. If you look at this slide that I'm posing you, is a coral reef ecosystem, is a marine ecosystem. And you will see that there are many different species of fish in here. So this is what I'm trying to say, that coral reef is one of the ecosystem where you can see biodiversity at the highest point of it. So, and this is only the picture of fish, but there are many thousands of invertebrate also that are housed within this coral reef ecosystem. So it's something to do with biodiversity. And in definition, biodiversity come in many different words or definition or phrase. And what we can gather is when we say biodiversity, is the word variety should come to our mind. So when we say biodiversity, is actually the variety of life, the different in plants, within plants, in animals, and even at the lowest microscopic organism, they also show some kind of biodiversity, either in the gene makeup or in the ecosystem where they are sharing with the others. Excuse me. Biological diversity, in a way, it has no really precise standard definition. There's no single standard definition. It always, if you try to Google it, it will come in many different versions, but the meaning are the same. So if we define biological diversity as a measure of relative diversity among organisms that is present in different ecosystems, perhaps this is the one that is very common or have the most in terms of definition that you can see from the reference, either book or from the internet. So it's a measure of relative diversity among organisms that are present in the ecosystem. That is a biological diversity. Because diversity can be in many other forms too, But when we say biodiversity or biological diversity, it meant a measure of relative diversity among organisms that are present in ecosystem. So diversity on this scope of definition can incorporate diversity that you see within the species or among the species that are present in the ecosystem, and also comparative diversity between the different ecosystem. So diversity can be at many different levels, depend on which diversity we are talking about. Is it species diversity, or is it interspecies diversity, or we are talking about ecosystem biodiversity? So those have different application in terms of how biodiversity is been defined. Yeah. But if you look at in terms of biodiversity, there are three forms that's always be put in front, and I presume that this is one of the correct way of approaching biodiversity. Is to look into these three major component of biodiversity, or three forms of biodiversity. One is genetic diversity. We know that genetic is something to do with the gene of the species, the DNA of the species. And among us too, we know that among ourselves, your genetic makeup is different from your friends next to you. And this is called genetic diversity. Is the variability in genetic makeup that you see among individual and the population. That means the individual of the same species. In case of dalam kes nak make you understand is kita manusia ni, kita dikenali sebagai Homo sapien. So even we are all Homo sapien, but there are many there are quite a big diversity that exists between the Homo sapien group. So whether it's at the individual level or at the population level. Population means gathering of individual of the same species. Secondly is species diversity. This is diversity that you see among the species. Among the species, you will see there are also a species diversity, as we are saying. And the third one is a ecosystem diversity. So species, genetic, ecosystem, these are the three forms of diversity that you must remember. That if any question been asked about biodiversity, the focus is on these three aspects of biodiversity that you should be able to tell the person who are asking the question. So ecosystem biodiversity is diversity that you see at a much higher level of organization, which is the ecosystem. Within the ecosystem, there are many components of the ecosystem, including the animal, plants, and whatever that in it. So ecosystem diversity is diversity at the much higher level. When we say biodiversity, we cannot running away from taxonomy. As I've been implying this in the previous course that you were taking with me, ethology, the role of taxonomy is very important. Although the progress of taxonomy in this era or in this century has not been that significant or made significant by people. Anyway, taxonomy is still important because when we are talking about biodiversity, you must attach it together with taxonomy. So taxonomy work out for us. As the existing, it tells about the existing diversity that we are talking about. So taxonomy is a way of telling on the diversity that exists in the level that we are looking at. So that means that if you have more species in relation to taxonomy, you are telling more about the higher diversity that you are referring to. Through taxonomy also, it will give you more information or enough information for the construction of phylogeny of life. We were talking about phylogeny of life, tree diagram in the lecture before. And please look at it when we mean phylogeny of life. There is some branching that is always associated with the taxonomy, meaning that there are information in taxonomy that we can use to build the phylogeny of life. Taxonomy also will tell us about the evolutionary process that has taken shape. Many of the group of animals, either vertebrate or invertebrate, has a wide evolutionary tracks and this has been of something of the important, because evolution always exists when there is a need, or mainly because of the changes in the surrounding environment. And in order for the species or animal or plant to continue living, they must evolve. So the evolutionary process phenomena is also well connected with the taxonomy. And number 4, as we all know, that taxonomy will lead to or will give rise to classification. Information on taxonomy we use to classify group of plant, group of animal into its own grouping, which when we say a group of invertebrates that is named after one phylum, you see that the taxonomy information or characteristic of the phylum is shared among all members that belong to that group. So this is among the role of taxonomy that is quite important for us to really see it, so that we, in a way, try to acknowledge the importance of taxonomy as a whole. This is the phylogenetic tree of life. As we know that animal exist in this world belong to these 4 main groups. And we see that this has been the construction of this phylogeny tree, the branching and everything is due or is helped by or is referred to the taxonomy information of each group that you see in here. For example, Animalia, fungi, plantae, ciliate, flagellates, and all the cyanobacteria, and these are all phylogeny tree of life that we see on our planet. And when we talk about taxonomy against, is mainly we are talking about the naming of the organism, naming of the organism that we encounter with. So in order to name the organism, the past history of naming organism started with the common name. But using common name is not easy, as people in the Europe would call the species by different name, and people in South America will call it by different common name, and people in Africa will call it by different name. So there is no uniformity in that. So as such, the scientists has agreed on establishing a standard nomenclature, biological nomenclature. So for us in animal, it's called zoological nomenclature. And this has been put up as a proper document and known as International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. So this code has been in existence for a long time, and all the scientists or all the people who are in academics and science follow this code when come to naming of the organism. So why we have to stick on to this ICZN? Another one of the reason or few of the reason that we can suggest is to promote stability. So stability means there are no difference between different part of the world and universality. Universality means is all over the world. People know when the name of, for example, tiger prawn, Penis monodon, is this tiger prawn that look like a stripe of red, black and gray color, and they are among the big species of pinid and available all in the tropical countries mostly. So it creates stability and universality in terms of scientific name of animal. And when we agree on this, all the scientific name that we given to the species would be unique, would be universal, and stable. That means people are not changing it. Everybody is following the same rule, same scientific name when you are referring to that particular species. Is the uniqueness that is the key of the problem, the key to the why we are following the nomenclature. Uniqueness in the sense that every name has to be unique. If several names has been given to the same taxa or the same taxon, priority decide which name is the valid name. So that's the job of the taxonomist. You will see that in some scientific name, there have been changes been made. For example, I just want to say, for example, blood cockle ataupun kerang yang kita makan selalu. The old name is Anadara granosa, that have been in use for many years, and now the new name is Tegellaka granosa. So all these, of course, have been reviewed by the people who are in the business, the taxonomists, the animal invertebrate taxonomist, that found that the name that we should use is the one that will be the one that is coming first. And the latter one, if found to be incorrect, will go back to the first one. Universality concepts that we see here is in the sense of it will be the agreement of ICZN will be followed by all countries in the world, and they are all using a single language, which is Latin. Okay, and part of that, they are using the Linnaeus introduction of binomial name, which is a generic and species name, and they are all written in Latin. Why Latin? Because at that time of of the knowledge expansion in science, Latin is the language of science. So that's why we see Latin. And in the present condition or present situation now, the Latin, when we write the word Latin in our essay or in our answers or question, you have to do it in italic. So you have heard of the Latin word like in situ, in vivo, in vitro. Those are all Latin and need to be italics. Or if you're writing it with your hand on writing, it has to be underlined. So all scientific name has to be underlined if written by hand, or you're doing it in the on the computer or any gadget, then they have the facilities to put it in italic. You have to italic that, and you must do that. So, and the third point of stability of this ICZN is to not to allow people to simply or frequently changing the name. And in that way, by preventing that, it lead to something what we call stability. So the role of biodiversity or the establishment of ICZN has its own objective. Three of them is clearly been mentioned here: uniqueness, universality, and also stability. So try to underline that and or write in your notes there. So these are the key points why International Code of Zoological Nomenclature is being established. And this ICZN is only applied to zoology. If it is a biological nomenclature, it's a different code altogether. So this rule that is applied in zoology has been followed very strictly by scientists and by all people who are in academic or in the subject of science, whether it is zoology or even when we're saying on the botany, they are also following the similar nomenclature that been designed, although there are some difference between the two. So the code gives us a bit of guidance in our naming of the new species. And although this will lead to or give rise to the naming of new species that can later be classified easily. So, so that also it avoiding people from naming, giving scientific name as they wish. So everybody has to follow the code of zoological nomenclature when they come to naming of new species, and also writing of scientific names and using it in their reports or in their writing. The famous person who are doing the classification based on taxonomic information was Linnaeus. Linnaeus is, I think it's Dutch or Swedish, I'm not sure now. In 1758, he published Systema Naturae, and this is the history of the book that been written by him. And in this book, Systema Naturae, he introduced the classification of plant and animal as it should be, and the introduction of Systema Naturae marked the beginning of the modern classification. Before that, classification has been used by people that are non-systematic, like for animal, whether they are poisonous or non-poisonous. Something that kind of classification, which is cannot be accepted universally. But Linnaeus has come up with a good classification that we have been following him until today. And he also developed a system called binomial nomenclature, which is the writing of scientific name of any organism as the generic name and also species name. So whenever you say a scientific name of the organism, it has two names in it, genus name and species name. And that's you have been briefed or been given on the examples many, many times. And later on, Linnaeus recommend on the taxonomic hierarchy for us to see the relationship between smaller unit to the bigger unit of classification. This is the standard or the typical taxonomic hierarchy that we see in animal. Although you might see domain on top of the kingdom, but kingdom is always the even kingdom itself is not yet is not been widely been spelled out. People would in writing, in practical writing, will start with phylum. Okay, although kingdom, there are 6 kingdoms now that exist in the zoology, but there are many phylum underneath it. So the way taxonomic hierarchy has been arranged, as you go down, you will have more information about the species. So the basic unit of individual is the genus and species. Species is the lowest taxonomic hierarchy, and phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is the one that you should remember as a student of biology or even ecoculture. But those standard or typical classification is not coming in straightforward as what I have been mentioning, because in taxonomy they are very dynamics and there are some disagreements between scientists, and such you will see the name of subphylum, which is a member of phylum, superclass, which is on top of the class, and there is subclass, superorder, subfamily, subgenus, and subspecies. All this sub is in many ways you have to follow it as it is, because it's been agreed upon by the nomenclature, but it's not wrong if you omit it as well. So by sticking to the phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species is the simplest way of classification, simple way of classifying your group of or your own your species of concern or designated species into into something that is of scientific classification. Ada orang nak masuk ke? Right. So currently there are about 28 known phyla, maybe more. I haven't updated actually for some times. And about 1.4 million species have been cataloged. Catalog means they have been given name. And estimated of about 8.7 million species that it believed to exist in planet Earth. So there's a long way in terms of knowledge. There are many species that are not given yet name. And this is the job of those who are interested in taxonomy. The vast majority of animals mainly belong to just 9 phyla. Phylum is singular, phyla is plural. Mollusca, which is a group of shell. Porifera, we are referring to the sponge. Cnidaria, we are referring to the group of jellyfish. Platyhelminthes, we are referring to group of flatworm. Nematoda, we are referring to the roundworm. Annelida, we are referring to the segmented worm. Arthropod, we are referring to animal with exoskeleton. Shrimp, crabs, lobster, copepods, and many other. They are all arthropoda. Echinodermata, you might have seen sea cucumber, you know sea urchin, and you know brittle star, and also starfish. Those are in Echinodermata. And chordate and chordata, which is the one that we are referring as intermediate before we are going into vertebrata. So these 9 phylum are quite important in terms of invertebrate studies. As you see, the number of species that exist in this group of phylum tend to vary according to the effort that been put by the scientists who are measuring in this group. So the bigger number of bigger figure doesn't mean that they are of the highest, but it can also imply that there are many scientists who are in this group. Hence, you see more new names, more new species has been derived or been introduced, and in a way that's, that group has been very popular in comparison to the other taxonomic phyla. As we have been saying, I just want to emphasize again, biological nomenclature introduced by Linnaeus is comprised of the genus and species name. And the practical way of writing this binomial name is using the 2 separate name with a space in between. The genus name always start with capital letter, always or must start with capital letter. And the species name is starting with the lowercase. So huruf besarnya pada genus name, huruf kecilnya bermula pada species name. Tolong ingat itu dan jangan buat mistake. Although I've been saying that this has been mentioned in the first lecture of etiology, but when come to the test, you still see that some of you are not really putting this into the head and always making mistake. During my time, if we write proper scientific name with full spelling correct, Yet, if you don't underline it, then your answer is not accepted. So that is how serious our days when the teacher emphasized on the writing of scientific name. So example of binomial name is, as in human being, is Homo sapien, H is the genus name, and S is the beginning of the species name. There's no full stop. Don't follow this one. I think I will correct after this in the slide here. Homo sapien and no full stop. So, but there is some exception here. When you are writing an essay or you're writing your thesis at the end of your 4 years period here, excuse me, when you're doing your final year project and you are required to write a thesis of your own, then only the first time that you should spell Homo sapien in full. After that, the genus name can be abbreviated. That means you just use the word H dot. That one ada titik there. H dot. And species name still keep in full. So when you see Homo sapien written with H sapien, meaning that if you look on the top paragraph, Homo sapien has been written in full. And after that, you can choose to do it as abbreviated, as an abbreviation, on the same paper or the same report. And all the while we are using genus and species name using Latin. Although Latin is not universal nowadays, English is, but Latin has been the language of science during the beginning of knowledge expansion during the ancient time. And normally people will keep the Latin name as it is, although they will, for example, you will come across there is maybe some kind of name that reflect the local site. That people, when scientists find new species, they want to attribute it to the country that they live in. Okay, for example, of the worm, marine worm, or we call it polychaetes, there is a name that is called Pronospio singaporensis. So Singaporensis come from the root word of Singapore. So we can tell that Pronospio singaporensis, actually the name is suggested by a Singaporean or by outside scientists who works in Singaporean species. So they wanted to use Singapore, but they have to make it Latin. So that's where the word Singaporensis come along. And if you heard there's some orchids or something given after the queen or the VVIP of the country, they will perhaps do the same. They try to Latinize it, although that goes to the name of the person. And this has been acceptable and it can be used, and there is no something that is not allowed in the nomenclature as long as you follow it and it's been agreed upon. Nobody make a comment on your naming, and is well justified. Often that we see after the scientific name, there is there's some kind of names that follow with it. So this is, as I've been telling you before, maybe for this Udangala, Macrobrachium rosenbergii, there is the name of D-Man. Okay, D-Man is meaning that he was the first person who named the giant freshwater prawn found in Malaysia at that time as Macrobrachium rosenbergii. And he named it in the year of 1879. And of course, the details are published in a journal or in the record somewhere. And the specimens are kept somewhere also, whether it's in the country of D-Man or in the museum that D-Man trusted. His specimen will be kept safely so that people can refer to it. So Macrobrachium rosenbergii, D-Man, 1879. Normally, we are using this kind of scientific name when you are putting the title of your thesis. When you're putting the title of the thesis on the ecological and larval development of Macrobrachium rosenbergii, then you put D-Man, 1879, only in the title. After that, you are using Macrobrachium rosenbergii as a full genus species name. And the third time you are using it is only M. rosenbergii. Okay, that's what you will see in most of the write-up or most of the journals publication that you see on the application of the scientific name. And I have mentioned this before also, that in taxonomy is very dynamic in the sense that it keep on changing. When people are revising the authentic of the scientific name, they will look at it and they're looking at it with some form of investigation. So sometimes that you see that in scientific name, there have been change. There have been some changes to it. And as we see here, I have some example here. For example, the typical scientific name is written as genus species, in this case, Balena mysticetus, that been named by Linnaeus in 1758. So we know that the person who named this species is Carolus Linnaeus. As we know, Linnaeus is a scientist himself. So, but we use Linnaeus, the surname. We don't use Carolus Linnaeus. It's only the author, is the surname is given in full and followed by the date of publication. And before that, a comma between author and date. If this species Balena or something that been changed to another name, that means some people have done a revision to it. So when the revision is done, then you will see that there are changes in the genus name, especially because normally species is there are some changes, but it's not as wide as the genus name. For example, given here at the lower paragraph there, the lowest one, there is a goose, or is a kind of a bird, Ite, that first described by Giovanni Antonio Scopoli as Branta albifron Scopoli. Remember, scientific surname dia saja yang dipakai. So Scopoli 1769 was the year that he named the white-fronted goose as Branta albifron. Later on, some other people who are in the same research interest in goose show that this species is more closely related to the gray geese than the white-fronted in the genus of Anser than to the black geese in Branta. So it was transferred to that genus and is now cited as Anser ablifrons. The name Scopoli has been retained to honor the first author who named it. So are the years, or so is the year. And the changes that you'll see in the scientific name is the bracket. So meaning that you don't simply put bracket after scientific name unless the bracket has the meaning. So in taxonomy, the bracket means the scientific name has been revised and changed from the original. So the example here from Branta, they changed it to Anser. Hence, it's been given the bracket. Okay? I hope that you understand on this. I've been saying this many times. So just to recap back. And the specimen where the name is given is normally kept safely somewhere, either with the author of the species that the name is given, or the best way is to put in the museum, where there will be a curator to look at this specimen, to ensure that in future people can come and have a look at this specimen to check whether their specimen is the same and if or is it different from the specimen where the name is given. So this specimen is called type specimen, TYPE. The type specimen is normally housed in the Museum of Natural History. It's not the Museum Negara or something like that. It's Museum of Natural History. For your information, Malaysia is the only country that doesn't have Museum of Natural History. Thailand has it, Indonesia has it, Vietnam has it. Of course, Singapore has a big natural history museum, Raffles, and we are left behind again, although we have many, many species that have been identified, and some of them are unique to this country. So as such, many of the Malaysian species type specimen has been kept in museums all over the world. Some of them are collected by the Australian and deposited in Sydney. Those who are collected by Singaporean that come with joint collaboration with Malaysian are kept in Singapore. Those that have been collected during the colonial days are brought back to Britain and kept in the Cromwell or British Natural History Museum, or in Amsterdam, Leiden, and many other in France. In France, though, there is a big natural history museum. So if we want to look at our species, we had to go to this museum because they cannot allow transfer of this species to Malaysia, for example. You had to spend money and go have a look there to see your species, whether to make sure it's the same or different from the type specimen. So type specimen are given names according to their status. For example, holotype. Holotype is meaning that type specimen that is called the types, and this holotype is the specimen that the original author used in his description and publication. So when you see the word holotype, is the original type specimen that been seen by the original author and still keep there. Although the original author might have passed away, but the text fragment is still there, well kept in many cases. There is another term that called isotype. Isotype is a duplicate specimen of the holotype collected at the same place and time as the holotype. So when you go to the field, you find one species that is weird and not very common, to your knowledge, you collect them. So make sure you collect more than one, because it could easily turn up to be a new species. And as such, the duplicate specimens is very important that is kept in the museum in case the holotype is damaged somehow by the process. So the one that can replace the holotype is one of the isotype. Okay, so isotype is a duplicate specimen. And there is also a term called neotype. A neotype is a specimen selected as type to the original description where the original specimen are known to be destroyed. So they pick up from isotype, and now the one of the isotype become neotype. It's not holotype, it replaced the holotype, and it's called the neotype. So this is among the three common types specimen that you will come across in the document or in terms of reading material that you see regarding the classification and also taxonomy. I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So that's so much on the biodiversity. Anybody interested to ask question or just to have any queries about the lecture content that are given? As I said, it's a refreshing, so it should serve the purpose of refreshing your knowledge about classification, taxonomy, and things that are related to taxonomy, such as nomenclature, binomials, nomenclature, and also specimen, type specimen. Ada tak? Ataupun semua boleh faham? Diam saja tu boleh faham kot?
InsyaAllah boleh, Prof.
Boleh, Prof. Boleh.
Okay, just refreshing, but there might be some question also that come up from that part. Okay, so kena baca juga. I want to allow to take a 5 minutes break untuk kita semua. And you need to go to the loo or something, or need to get a glass of water for yourself. I'll see you in about 5 minutes time. Okay, boleh kita sambung?
Boleh, Prof.
Boleh, Prof.
All right, thank you. So the first module that will be as a starting module is to look into this group of animals. We can say animal or can also say plants because they have the characteristic of both. And you might have heard of this term protozoa before, or protozoans. We are referring to the members of protozoa. And they are important creatures in aquatic environment. Mainly when we talk about protozoa, that is relevant to us would be the rotifer. Why rotifer? Rotifer is the first live food that you need to prepare when you are doing the hatching of the shrimps, crabs, and even fish. These are the starting food, live food that you have to culture and give them. Otherwise, your larvae will die without foods when they are ready to take it. But you have come across some of the members of protozoan, such as the volvox, when you were studying general biology, either in school, or Euglena, perhaps also you had come across with it. And the most important one that has been introduced since the even primary science subjects, primary school science subject, is amoeba. So this amoeba, amoeba is also members of the group protozoa. As I said, that they are numerous and tiny. They are microscopic. Many you cannot see with your own naked eyes, and hence you have to see them under a microscope. So they have a very interesting life. But if you look into your Putra Blast, I have included some videos of these representative in high definition images, some of them. So because to see them even in microscope in the lab, we cannot able to see it because our microscope in our lab are not of the high resolution microscope. So you can't see, for example, amoeba, the insides content of amoeba clearly with microscope that we have. And so are the like Euglena, you only see a pinpoint in the images of that size. Okay, so but the beauty of today's information on science, you can get down to the picture that is of very high resolution, and you'll be able even to see at the nucleus component, nucleus level of the species. Okay, some of the well-known, excuse me, some of the protozoan that are well known to us that you perhaps come across it when you're doing the reading, or these protozoan actually have some impact on certain aspect of life of people in these planets. So they become well known. For example, amoeba. Amoeba has been introduced as the protozoan. So what is protozoans? We will come to the characteristic later. So amoeba proteus, if you see, is well studied by a researcher. And there are also protozoan that can cause malaria. And this protozoan is known as Plasmodium. So nyamuk is not the one that cause malaria, it's the protozoan. The mosquito is only the vector. So Plasmodium is the cause of malaria. And Euglena has been very well presented in many documents because they are example of flagellates, protozoa that have like a thread atau berbenang di bahagian anteriornya yang dipanggil sebagai flagella. Okay? And this also one protozoa that cause disease in Africa is called African sleeping sickness. And this is caused by Trypanosoma. Trypanosoma is a protozoan. Okay? So many of the protozoan are parasites themselves and they cause illness. African sleeping sickness is a kind of disease or epidemic that run through Africa for quite some time. Okay, and there are protozoan that live in the gut of the termite of another animal. An ionized termite that is inside there, they have a trichonympha that live in it, symbiosis. There are also dinoflagellate. We're saying dinoflagellate in our document. Dinoflagellate. What are dinoflagellate? They are members of the protozoan as well. And of course, there are one that cause dysentery, which is entamoeba, which is also of the group of invertebrate that can have negative impact to the human life. So just to reflect back retro on the five kingdom classification that we learned earlier on in our metric or in our diploma, maybe this have been introduced. This is among the earlier classification of the kingdom. It's called five kingdom system of classification, where the five components of the five kingdom are the Monera. This is referring to the prokaryotes, that means the old group of living thing, organism. They are bacteria mostly, and the group is Monera. Then you have the group called Protista or Protoctista. These are the group for the algae and the protozoans that are unicellular group. Okay, the Protista or Protoctista belong to the algae or protozoan that are unicellular. These two are prokaryotes. But the one that is eukaryotes of the modern with nucleus are the plantae, which is multicellular, more than one cell. Animalia, which is multicellular, also more than one cell. And the other component is fungi. Okay, these are the five kingdoms, and plus one is there is one on Archaea, I think that become the kingdom. I'll get in the new information added to this slide later on. Okay, this is a five kingdom classification that been used by scientists for a long time, and is introduced by Whittaker in 1969. Okay, so these are in characteristic. You will see that whether they are prokaryote, the old cell without any nucleus, or eukaryote with nucleus, whether they are unicellular or they are multicellular. So we will come across the word multicellular and unicellular more as we move on. So protozoan are regarded as early animals that exist in this planet. They are unicellular. That means they only have one cell. Of course, they are not multicellular. Multicellular is having more than one cell. Most of the animal at the higher organization or setup are multicellular. The one that exists long time ago are unicellular mostly. And multicellular mean they have a special organ difference from one another. One organ of different function. But unicellular is one cell that is doing everything. One cell that is doing the feeding, one cell is doing the reproduction, and one cell that is doing the osmoregulation and everything, all within that one cell. So these are the group that known as protozoan, unicellular. Remember the word or the term. When you are saying about protozoan, you are referring to unicellular organism. Organisma unicell. And they are normally, protozoan are placed in the kingdom of Protista or Protoctista, as I've been saying. The general features of the protozoans, normally they are complete organism, but one thing is all life activities or physiological function are taking place inside the single plasma membrane. So all in one cell. Although they are regarded as complete organism with all the life function, but they are in only one cell. And phylogenetic studies show that protozoa do not form monophyletic group. So they don't form any other related group. But more than 60,000 species are named. Nearly half has gone and they are in fossil state. Besides being unicellular, but they don't have proper organ, but instead of the organ, they have been replaced by the structure called organelles. These organelles are highly specialized for either for feeding or for doing other physiological activities. It's been run by the organelle, not by the organ. They are ecologically diverse, yes. They can be found in water, they can be found on land, they can be found at extreme environment, widely dispersed, but many somehow prefer to live in very narrow environmental range. They can be numerous, many, and in some they are very significant in terms of numbers. They can also be symbiotic in animal or plant, and some are human disease agent, as I said, African sleeping sickness, malaria, and also others. Some are colonial with multicellular stages, but have non-colonial form. So they don't actually form a real colonial form, but with some multicellular stages. Protozoan has only one reproductive cell type, and they lack embryonic development. There are no embryonic development as you see in higher animal or metazoan. So protozoa are early animals. They don't show embryonic development, and it has only one reproductive cell type. They are unicellular with some colony and multicellular stages mentioned already. Most are microscopic. That means you cannot see them with naked eye. You have to see under a microscope. All symmetry are present, whether they are bilateral symmetry or non-symmetricals. They are all of that shape. No germ layers are present. No reproductive cells are present. No organ or tissues are formed, but specialized organelles serve for this function. They can be free-living, mutualistic, commensal, or parasitic, either of this mode of living. They move by using pseudopodia, flagella, or cilia, or some are called direct cell movement. Most are naked. That means they don't have exoskeleton or endoskeleton. Their nutrition exists in the form of autotrophic. That means they can make their own foods. Heterotrophic, they are eating on others. Or saprozoic, which is more like fungi type of. So they can exist in all type of nutrition. They can be aquatic or terrestrial, can be found in water or on land. Reproduction is mostly asexual by fission. That means they just tanpa fertilization of a gamete, just asexual without sexual gamete, just by division, dividing into two, is called fission. Or they can form budding or cysts, or in some cases, there's a sexual reproduction by the process of conjugation or syngamy. This is only in Paramecium, selalunya kita tahu. In terms of classification, in tradition, protozoan has been classified under one major phylum, phylum Protozoa, but later on they have been upgraded to the stage of subkingdom. And for the purpose of easy classification, as you will notice that in book or in the internet, they will give you different classification. So I'm going to adopt this recent classification where protozoan are divided into several major phyla. So meaning that you all pakai saya punya approach ni, walaupun dia tidak yang terkini. Okay? But it's not wrong, but not terkini. So they are arranged in four categories or four phylum here we can say. Phylum Coelophora, the one with the cilia. Phylum Dinophyta, Euglenophyta, and Chlorophyta. These are the group that look like plant. Phylum Rhizopodia and Actinopoda. This is the phylum with kaki palsu atau dipanggil Pseudopodia. And phylum Sporozoa. These are the phylum where members produce spore as their mode of reproduction. So these four phylum or categories, because some of them in more than one phyla there, more than one phylum, like Dinophyta. So these categories are the one that we encounter them quite often in our documents or in our teaching of subject that is related. You will meet this perhaps again in the fish disease parasitology subject later on. Okay, in terms of classification that is non-taxonomic, protozoa can be classified into three main grouping. Okay, this is non-taxonomic. Okay, one of the classification that people use is plant-like flagellates. Okay, this belong to the phylum Dinophyta, which is dinoflagellate. Example-nya adalah Serratium. Phylum Euglinophyta, example-nya adalah Euglena. Phylum Chlorophyta, example-nya ialah Chlamydomonas or Volvox. Okay? And secondly is animal-like flagellates. Dia ada flagella juga dalam kumpulan ni, tapi merupai animal. Yang atasnya tu menyerupai plant-like. Animal-like example here is Kinetoplastida, which is trypanosoma, yang menyebabkan sleeping sickness in Africa. Kemudian amoeboid protozoan. These are protozoan that look like amoeba. Two phylum here, Rhizopoda and Actinopoda. Examples, the easiest for Rhizopoda adalah amoeba. And for phylum Actinopoda adalah Actinosporium. Number 4 is spore-forming protozoan. This is one phylum called phylum Sporozoa that cause malaria, which is Plasmodium. And number 5 is ciliate or ciliated protozoan dalam phylum Coleophora or Paramecium. Okay, so ada 5. Try to remember all dan sekurang-kurangnya satu contoh pada setiap kategori. Ada 5, kurang-kurangnya remember satu contoh. Saya tak kata phylum, saya kata Euglena bagi plant-like flagellates, Trypanosoma sebagai animal-like, amoeba sebagai amoeboid protozoan, Plasmodium for spore forming, and Paramecium for ciliated protozoan. Okay? So these are what we have been talking about. So, Euglena, that's how it looked like, maybe a bit greenish and in real color. Dinoflagellate, normally they live in a casing there. Dia ada casing, dia ada rumah dia. So dinoflagellate live in that casing, but you can see the flagella coming out from the internal side. Paramecium, kita dah tengok gambar Paramecium ni since sekolah rendah. So they are unique animal, one cell organism, is protozoan that widely been studied, and so are the amoeba, animal of non-specific shape. Sekejap dia rupa macam ni, sekejap lagi bentuk badannya akan bertukar menjadi bentuk yang lain. This form of changes in structure is because of the characteristic of the pseudopodia or the phosphate that you see present in amoeba. Kemudian there is one group of protozoan that are found many on the sea floor, di bahagian dasar laut. Banyak digunakan dalam kajian paleontologi, jadi kajian untuk menentukan evolusi dan sebagainya. And this group is called Foraminifera. Foraminifera juga duduk dalam casingnya dan dia mempunyai kaki yang rupa seperti duri itu. That is also the same as pseudopodia. Okay, these are the common one that you see ada dalam protozoa yang common one. Let's try to finish one or two slide more before we stop. Ciliated protozoan, for example-nya yang senangnya Paramecium ada cilia di tepi badan dia. This a classic example for ciliated protozoan. Paramecium look like sleeper, but with tiny hairs around the body, and this hairs is known as cilia. They glide through the water by beating of the cilia. They can be found in pond, slow-moving stream, or any enclosed area with water in it. Paramecium do reproduce through, they produce asexual by splitting down the middle. Jadi dia membagi kepada dua individu melalui pemecahan ataupun pemisahan pada bahagian tengah badan. Or they do also sexually in the process called conjugation. Conjugation happens when food is short and the two new individuals come together and exchange genetic material from their nuclei. Then they swing off, and at the end of conjugation process, you will have 4 new Paramecium. So conjugation in definition is when two Paramecium come in contact to one another for the purpose of reproduction, and when they are in contact to another, there have been exchange of genetic material from one individual to another. Okay, that is conjugation, and it is sexual modes. Known to feed on bacteria and small particles, the Paramecium catches its food by swimming through the water and also catching food particles. So they're known to feed on bacteria and small particles. So protozoan such as Paramecium is important in the ecosystem interaction between different groupings. This is conjugation that you see in Paramecium. You see two Paramecium get together and there is a change of genetic material before they split to form into 4 new daughter cells. This is how Paramecium sexual reproduction through conjugation happen. So have a look at it to make it your understanding on the sexual reproduction conjugation process in Paramecium. All right, so I want to stop at this point. Next week, we are going to continue on the general characteristic of phylum of what we can call it a subkingdom of protozoa, and continue there on until finish of module 1. So is there any question from the floors, from any of you here? Okay, so lecture note-nya tu ada dalam Putra Blast. Please go through and add in daripada bacaan, daripada buku ataupun daripada sumber lain dalam internet. Write something that will make you understand on that notes. Alright? So, ada soalan? Tak ada soalan lagi? Senang saya mengajar. You all tak bertanya soalan. Ada kelas tak lepas ni? Tak ada?
Ada, Prof.
Ada yang ada yang tak ada. Okay, before you go, can you put on your video on? I just want to see the face, everybody. I've been saying, Habizul aja selalu. Before